The money was piled high on the center table, and standing beside it was a woman who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floorboards of the Silver Spur Saloon. Natalie Bradford stood with her arms crossed protectively over her chest, her dark hair pinned back in a severe bun that did nothing to hide the angry flush creeping up her neck. It was September 1878 in Leavenworth, Kansas, and the air inside the saloon was thick with cigar smoke and the smell of spilled whiskey. The afternoon sun streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above the heads of a dozen rough men who had gathered for what the saloon owner, Marcus Daniels, called his annual poker championship. Natalie had worked at the Silver Spur for 3 years, serving drinks and keeping the peace as best she could. She was 22 years old and had come to Kansas after her parents died of fever back in Ohio. She had dreams once, dreams of teaching school or maybe opening her own dress shop, but those dreams had withered in the harsh reality of frontier life. Working in a saloon was one of the few jobs available to a woman alone, and Marcus Daniels had seemed decent enough when he hired her. That illusion had shattered this morning when he told her she would be the grand prize for whoever won the championship game. "I will not do this," she had said, her voice shaking with fury. Marcus had leaned back in his chair, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. "You owe me money, girl. You remember that loan I gave you when you first arrived, to pay for your room and board? That debt is still outstanding, $300 with interest. You can either stand there and let the winner claim you as his bride, or you can work it off over the next 10 years. Your choice." Natalie had felt the walls closing in. She had been so desperate when she arrived in Leavenworth, sick from the journey and without a cent to her name. Marcus had seemed kind then, offering her work in a small room above the saloon. She had signed papers without reading them carefully, trusting him because she had no other option. Now she understood the trap he had set. So here she stood, humiliated and angry, watching as the poker players eyed her like she was a piece of property. Most of them were local men she recognized from the saloon, ranch hands and drifters with calloused hands and hungry eyes. But there was one man she did not know, a tall cowboy who sat at the far end of the table with his hat pulled low over his eyes. He had dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. Unlike the others, he did not look at her with greed or lust. In fact, he barely looked at her at all, keeping his attention focused on the cards in his hand. "Gentlemen, place your final bets," Marcus announced, rubbing his hands together with barely concealed glee. This tournament had drawn more customers than the Silver Spur had seen in months, and regardless of who won, Marcus was walking away with a fat profit. The stranger at the end of the table pushed a stack of bills into the center. "I am all in," he said quietly. His voice was deep and steady, with a hint of an accent Natalie could not quite place. The other players grumbled and folded one by one until only 2 remained, the stranger and a brutish ranch foreman named Clayton Webb. Clayton was a mean drunk who had put his hands on Natalie more than once, earning himself a slap and a warning from Marcus that he would be banned if he tried it again. The thought of Clayton winning this game made Natalie's stomach turn. "Let us see what you have got, stranger," Clayton said, laying down his cards with a triumphant grin. 3 queens beat that." The stranger carefully placed his cards face up on the table. Straight flush, hearts. The room erupted in shouts and groans. Clayton's face turned purple with rage, and for a moment Natalie thought he might flip the table. But Marcus was already there, his hand on Clayton's shoulder, pushing him back into his seat. "A fair game, gentlemen. The winner is Ethan Mitchell." So that was his name. Ethan Mitchell stood up slowly, his considerable height becoming apparent as he towered over the other men. He was probably 26 or 27, Natalie guessed, with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who spent his days working hard under the sun. He walked toward her, his boots thudding against the wooden floor, and Natalie forced herself to meet his eyes. They were green, she noticed, like new leaves in spring. "Miss Bradford," he said, tipping his hat. "I wonder if you would step outside with me for a moment. I believe we need to talk." She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him and Marcus and every man in this saloon exactly what she thought of them. But curiosity got the better of her. There was something in Ethan's manner that suggested he was not like the others. Without a word, she followed him through the swinging doors and onto the dusty street. The afternoon was warm, and Main Street was busy with people going about their business. A wagon rattled past, loaded with sacks of grain. Across the street, the general store was doing brisk trade. Everything looked so normal, so ordinary, as if Natalie's entire life had not just been gambled away in a card game. Ethan walked a few paces away from the saloon entrance and turned to face her. Up close, she could see the worry lines around his eyes and a scar that ran along his left cheekbone. He took off his hat and held it in his hands, running his thumb along the brim. "Miss Bradford, I want you to know I did not come here today with any intention of winning a woman," he began. "I came because I heard there was a big poker game with a substantial pot, and I needed the money. I had no idea Marcus Daniels had added you to the prize until I sat down at that table." "Then why did you keep playing?" Natalie demanded. "You could have walked away." "I could have," Ethan agreed, "but then someone like Clayton Webb would have won, and I saw the way he looked at you. I figured you would prefer almost anyone over him." He was right about that, but Natalie was not ready to give him any credit. "So you thought you would be my hero, save me from the big bad foreman and claim me as your prize?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "I do not believe any man has the right to claim a woman as a prize. What Marcus Daniels did in there is wrong, and if you want to press charges against him, I will stand as a witness." Natalie laughed bitterly. "Press charges? Do you think any judge in Kansas is going to side with a saloon girl over a business owner? I signed papers, Mr. Mitchell. I owe him money. As far as the law is concerned, this is all perfectly legal." Ethan was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "How much do you owe him?" $300 with interest. Might as well be $3,000 for all the chance I have of paying it back on a saloon girl's wages. "I have a proposition for you," Ethan said slowly. "I own a ranch about 15 miles north of here. It is not much, just a small operation with some cattle and horses. I have been working it alone for the past 2 years, and frankly, I could use some help. What if you came to work for me? I will pay you fair wages, enough to pay off your debt to Marcus within a year. You will have your own room in the house, and I give you my word that I will treat you with respect. No strings attached." Natalie stared at him, searching for the catch. Men did not make offers like this without expecting something in return. "Why would you do that?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Ethan said simply. "And because I genuinely do need help on the ranch. I lost my hired hand last month when he decided to try his luck in the California gold fields. The work is hard, I will not lie to you about that. But it is honest work, and you will be free to leave whenever you want." "Free to leave," Natalie repeated. Just like that, just like that. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that someone in this world could be decent without wanting something in exchange. But 3 years of hard living had taught her to be cautious. "What kind of work are we talking about?" she asked. "Cooking, mostly. Cleaning. I have a vegetable garden that needs tending. During branding season, I will need help managing the supplies and keeping the crew fed. If you know anything about horses, that would be useful too. My mare is about to foal, and I could use an extra set of hands." Natalie considered this. She had grown up on a small farm in Ohio before her parents died, so she knew her way around livestock. Cooking and cleaning were certainly within her abilities, and anything would be better than staying at the Silver Spur under Marcus's thumb. "I want it in writing," she said. "A proper contract that says I work for you for 1 year, you pay me wages, and at the end of that year, my debt to Marcus is cleared and I am free to go." Ethan nodded. "We can go to the lawyer's office right now and draw up the papers. And my room. I want a lock on the door that only I have the key to." "Agreed. And if you try anything at all, I have a Derringer that my father gave me, and I know how to use it." "I would expect nothing less," Ethan said, and there was something like approval in his voice. "Do we have a deal, Miss Bradford?" Natalie took a deep breath. She could go back into that saloon and face Marcus's smug satisfaction, or she could take a chance on this stranger who had kind eyes and a ridiculous sense of honor. It was not much of a choice when she thought about it that way. "We have a deal, Mr. Mitchell." They shook hands, and Natalie felt the rough calluses on his palm. These were the hands of a man who worked hard for everything he had. Maybe, just maybe, she had made the right choice. The lawyer's office was a small clapboard building next to the bank. Jeremiah Stone was a thin man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, and he listened carefully as Ethan explained what they needed. Within an hour, a contract had been drawn up, signed, and witnessed. Ethan paid the lawyer's fee and then surprised Natalie by handing her a copy of the contract. "Keep this somewhere safe," he said, "in case there is ever any question about our arrangement." Their next stop was the Silver Spur, where Marcus was still celebrating his profitable afternoon with a glass of expensive whiskey. His smile faded when he saw the papers Ethan placed on the bar. "What is this?" "A contract," Ethan said. "Miss Bradford is coming to work for me. In 1 year's time, I will pay you the $300 she owes, plus 20% interest. That is more than fair." Marcus skimmed the document, his face darkening. "This was not our arrangement." "Our arrangement was that I won the poker game," Ethan said calmly. "I did. Now Miss Bradford belongs to me according to your rules, and I say she works on my ranch. You will get your money, Daniels. That is all you really care about anyway." For a moment, Marcus looked like he might argue. But several other patrons had stopped their drinking to watch the confrontation, and Marcus was smart enough to know when he was beaten. He had his reputation to think about, after all. "Fine," he spat. "But if she runs off, you are still on the hook for that money, Mitchell." "I will not run off," Natalie said coldly. "I will work honestly to pay back every cent, and then I will never have to see your face again, Marcus Daniels." She went upstairs to pack her few belongings, which did not take long. A change of clothes, her father's Derringer, a few books, and a cameo brooch that had belonged to her mother. Everything she owned in the world fit into a single carpet bag. As she took one last look around the small room that had been her home for 3 years, she felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. Whatever came next, it had to be better than this. Ethan was waiting for her outside with 2 horses. One was a solid bay gelding that he rode, and the other was a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze on her face. "This is Rosie," Ethan said, patting the mare's neck. "She is a good girl, real steady. Have you ridden much?" "Not for a few years, but I used to ride all the time back home." "It will come back to you. We have about 2 hours before we reach the ranch, and I would like to get there before dark." Natalie tied her carpetbag to the saddle and mounted Rosie with only a little awkwardness. The mare stood patiently, and soon they were riding north out of Leavenworth, leaving the town and the Silver Spur behind. The Kansas landscape stretched out before them, rolling prairie grass as far as the eye could see. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. A warm breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and earth. Natalie had forgotten how beautiful the open country could be, how it made you feel both small and infinite at the same time. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic clopping of hooves and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. Natalie studied Ethan's back, noting the easy way he sat in the saddle, completely at home. She wondered about his story, about how he had ended up with a ranch in Kansas, and why he was working it alone. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Mitchell?" she said finally. "Ethan, we are going to be living under the same roof, no need for formality." "Ethan, then, what made you decide to run a ranch out here?" He was quiet for a moment, and Natalie thought he might not answer. Then he said, "My father had a ranch in Texas. I grew up working cattle, learning everything I could, but my father and I did not see eye to eye on certain matters. He believed in doing things the old way, the hard way. He believed that might made right, and he did not care much about the consequences of his actions." "What kind of consequences?" "The kind that hurt people who could not defend themselves," Ethan said carefully. "When I was 24, I watched my father and his men drive a family of Mexican settlers off land they had legally purchased, just because my father wanted to expand his operation. I tried to stop him, and we had a falling out. He told me if I did not like how he did business, I should get out. So I did. That must have been hard." "It was the best decision I ever made," Ethan said. "I took my inheritance from my mother's side of the family and came north, bought this land fair and square, and I have been building it up ever since. It is not much, but it is mine, and I run it the right way." Natalie felt something shift inside her chest, a tiny crack in the armor she had built around her heart. This man had given up his family and his home because he believed in doing the right thing. Maybe there were still good people in the world after all. "What about you?" Ethan asked. "How did you end up in Leavenworth?" So Natalie told him about Ohio, about her parents dying within a week of each other during a fever outbreak. She told him about selling the farm to pay their debts and heading west because everyone said there were opportunities on the frontier. She told him about arriving in Leavenworth sick and broke, about Marcus's false kindness and the trap she had walked into. "I was so stupid," she said, her voice catching. "I should have known better than to trust him." "You were not stupid," Ethan said firmly. "You were desperate and alone, and he took advantage of that. The fault is his, not yours." They rode on as the sun sank lower, and eventually Ethan pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance. "There, that is home." The ranch house was a sturdy wooden structure with a wide porch and a stone chimney. It was not fancy, but it looked well maintained and solid. Near the house was a barn, a chicken coop, and a corral where several horses grazed peacefully. Beyond that, Natalie could see pastureland dotted with cattle. It was a modest operation, but there was something appealing about its simplicity. They dismounted, and Ethan led the horses to the barn. Natalie followed, watching as he unsaddled both animals with practiced efficiency and rubbed them down. He showed her where the feed was kept and how much to give each horse, explaining his routine in a matter-of-fact way that suggested he truly did expect her to help with the work. "Let me show you the house," he said once the horses were settled. The interior was clean but sparse, with simple furniture and few decorations. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a cast iron stove, a large table, and a couple of worn armchairs. There were 2 bedrooms, one on each side of the house. "This will be your room," Ethan said, opening the door on the left. It was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the prairie. True to his word, there was a lock on the door. Ethan handed her the key. I had my hired hand's room prepared before he left. I cleaned out all his belongings and put fresh linens on the bed. Thank you, Natalie said, and she meant it. The washroom is out back. There is a pump for water. I know it is not as convenient as having everything inside, but we make do. I have lived with less. Ethan smiled for the first time since she had met him, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. I bet you have. Well, I will let you settle in. I need to check on the animals and make sure everything is locked up for the night. There is bread and cheese in the cupboard if you are hungry, and I will cook us a proper breakfast in the morning. After he left, Natalie sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything that had happened. This morning she had woken up in her cramped room above the Silver Spur, and now she was here in a ranch house in the middle of the prairie, working for a man she had just met. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt a strange sense of peace. She unpacked her carpetbag, hanging her spare dress in the small closet and placing her mother's cameo on the dresser where she could see it. The derringer went under her pillow, just in case. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the darkening sky. Stars were beginning to appear, bright pinpricks against the deepening blue. In the distance, she could hear the lowing of cattle and the chirping of crickets. It was so different from the noise and chaos of the saloon, so quiet and still. A knock on her door made her jump. Miss Bradford. I am heading to bed. There is a bolt on the inside of the front door if you want to lock it for the night. Thank you, Ethan. Sleep well. She listened to his footsteps crossing to the other side of the house, heard the creak of his bed as he lay down. Then silence. Natalie bolted the front door as he had suggested and returned to her room, locking that door as well. Only then did she allow herself to undress and climb into bed. The sheets smelled like soap and sunshine, and the mattress was more comfortable than anything she had slept on in years. As she lay in the darkness, Natalie realized she was not afraid. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Pale dawn light filtered through her window, and she could hear Ethan moving around in the kitchen, the clatter of pots and pans, the pop and sizzle of grease. Natalie dressed quickly and emerged from her room to find the table set for two, and Ethan standing at the stove with a spatula in his hand. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "I did, actually. Better than I have in months." "Good. Breakfast is almost ready. There is fresh water in the pitcher if you want to wash up." They ate together in companionable silence, and Natalie had to admit that Ethan was a decent cook. The bacon was perfectly crispy, the eggs done just right, and the coffee was strong and hot. After they finished, Ethan pushed his plate back and leaned forward. "I thought I would spend today showing you around the property and explaining how everything works. Tomorrow we can start getting into a regular routine. Does that sound all right?" "That sounds fine." They spent the morning walking the ranch. Ethan showed her the vegetable garden, which was in desperate need of weeding. He introduced her to the chickens, explaining which ones were the best layers and which ones were mean enough to peck. He took her out to the pasture to see the cattle, a small herd of about 30 head. And he showed her the pregnant mare, a beautiful chestnut named Daisy who nickered softly when Ethan approached. "She is due any day now," Ethan said, stroking Daisy's nose. "This will be her first foal, so I am a little nervous. Sometimes first-time mothers have complications." "I helped deliver foals back on our farm," Natalie said. "My father taught me what to watch for." Ethan looked at her with surprise and respect. "That is good to know. I might need your help when the time comes." As the day went on, Natalie found herself relaxing. Ethan was easy to talk to, never pushing or prying, but always willing to answer her questions. He explained his plans for expanding the herd, his hopes of breeding quality horses to sell to the cavalry. He talked about the challenges of running a ranch alone, the constant worry about drought and disease and rustlers. "It is a lot of work," he admitted, "but I have never been afraid of hard work, and there is something satisfying about building something with your own two hands, you know. Knowing that everything you have, you earned." Natalie did know. She had worked hard her whole life, first on the farm with her parents and then at the saloon. But the work at the saloon had always felt empty somehow, like she was pouring her energy into a bottomless pit and getting nothing back. This felt different. This felt like working towards something. That evening, Natalie cooked dinner, a simple meal of fried chicken and biscuits. Ethan praised her cooking effusively, saying it was the best meal he had eaten in months. They washed the dishes together, and then Ethan went out to do a final check on the animals while Natalie sat on the porch and watched the sunset. She could get used to this, she thought. The peace and quiet, the honest work, the sense of purpose. And Ethan was proving to be a good man, someone she could trust. She had been right to take this chance. The days fell into a rhythm. Natalie woke early and started breakfast while Ethan did the morning feeding. They ate together, and then they would split up to tackle the day's tasks. Natalie took over the cooking and most of the household chores, and she spent hours in the vegetable garden, pulling weeds and harvesting vegetables. Ethan worked with the cattle and horses, mending fences and training the younger animals. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk. Ethan told her stories about growing up in Texas, about learning to rope and ride before he could barely walk. Natalie told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents and the little farm that had been her whole world. They discovered shared interests, a love of books and a fascination with the stars. Ethan had a small collection of books that he lent her, and she devoured them hungrily, grateful for the escape they provided. 2 weeks after Natalie arrived, Daisy went into labor. It was the middle of the night when Ethan pounded on her door, his voice urgent. "Natalie, I need you. Daisy is foaling and something is wrong." She was up and dressed in seconds, grabbing a lantern and following Ethan to the barn. Daisy was lying on her side in the straw, her flanks heaving and covered in sweat. Natalie could see immediately what the problem was. "The foal is breech," she said, kneeling beside the mare. "We need to turn it. Can you do it?" "I have done it before, but I will need your help to hold her steady." For the next hour, they worked together in the dim light of the lantern. Natalie reached inside the mare, feeling for the foal's legs, trying to guide it into the correct position. It was exhausting, nerve-wracking work, and more than once she thought they might lose both mare and foal. But finally, she felt the foal shift. "There, I think I have got it. Okay, Daisy, you can push now, girl." With a final tremendous effort, Daisy delivered a long-legged colt with a white star on his forehead. The foal lay still for a heart-stopping moment, and then he shook his head and took his first breath. Daisy nickered and began licking her baby clean. Natalie sat back in the straw, exhausted and exhilarated. Ethan was grinning from ear to ear, looking at the new foal with undisguised joy. "You did it," he said. "You saved them both." "We did it," Natalie corrected. "I could not have managed without you." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Natalie felt something pass between them, something warm and electric. In that moment, covered in sweat and straw and who knows what else, she had never felt more alive. "Thank you, Natalie," Ethan said softly. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not been here. You would have figured it out. You are resourceful. Maybe, but I am glad I did not have to try." They stayed in the barn until they were sure both mare and foal were stable. Dawn was breaking by the time they trudged back to the house, tired but happy. Natalie made a huge breakfast and they ate like they had not seen food in days, laughing and talking about the new colt. "What are you going to name him?" Natalie asked. "I thought maybe Star, because of that marking on his forehead. What do you think?" "I think it is perfect." Something shifted between them after that night. The easy companionship they had developed deepened into something more. Natalie found herself looking forward to their evening conversations with an eagerness that surprised her. She noticed small things about Ethan, like the way he hummed while he worked, and how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She noticed how gentle he was with the animals, how patient and kind, and she caught him watching her sometimes, his expression soft and contemplative. When their hands accidentally brushed as they passed dishes at dinner, she felt a spark that had nothing to do with static electricity. One evening about a month after she arrived, they were sitting on the porch watching the stars. It was a warm September night, and the air was filled with the sound of crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. Natalie was wrapped in a shawl and Ethan had brought out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "I do not usually drink," Natalie said when he offered her a glass. "Neither do I much, but tonight feels like a celebration." "What are we celebrating? You have been here a month." "The ranch is running smoother than it has in years. The garden is thriving, the animals are healthy, and I have not had to eat my own terrible cooking. I would say that is worth celebrating." Natalie laughed and accepted the glass. The whiskey burned going down, but it left a pleasant warmth in her chest. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their drinks and watching the stars wheel overhead. "Can I tell you something?" Ethan said eventually. "Of course." "When I won that poker game, I did not know what I was going to do. I knew I could not just leave you there with Marcus, but I also knew you had no reason to trust me. I thought for sure you would refuse my offer and think I was just another man trying to take advantage." "I almost did refuse," Natalie admitted. "But there was something about you, something in your eyes that made me think you might be telling the truth, and I was right. I am glad you took the chance. I cannot imagine this place without you now. You have made it feel like a home instead of just a place I sleep." Natalie felt her heart skip a beat. "Ethan, I need to tell you something too. I came here thinking this was just a job, a way to pay off my debt and move on. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. This place, these animals, it all feels like where I am supposed to be." He turned to look at her, and in the starlight his eyes were dark and intense. "Natalie, I do not want you to leave when the year is up. I do not want to leave either. I mean it. I do not want you to leave ever. I have feelings for you. I think I have had them since the day I met you, but I did not want to say anything because of our arrangement. I did not want you to think I expected something from you, or that you owed me anything beyond honest work." Natalie's heart was pounding now, so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "What kind of feelings?" Ethan set down his glass and took her hand. His touch was warm and solid and real. "The kind that make me think about the future. The kind that make me want to give you everything I have, everything I am. Natalie Bradford, I am in love with you." She could barely breathe. No one had ever said those words to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way Ethan was looking at her now, like she was precious and valuable and wanted. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have loved you since the night you helped me deliver Star, maybe even before that." Ethan stood up and pulled her to her feet, and then his arms were around her and he was kissing her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But Natalie kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past month, all the loneliness and fear and hope she had been carrying. His lips were soft and warm, and he tasted like whiskey and something else, something uniquely him. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, and Natalie could feel his heart beating as fast as her own. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "I know it is fast, and I know we have only known each other a short time, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I want to spend every day with you. I want to build this ranch with you, grow old with you. Say yes, Natalie. Please say yes." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Mitchell." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time with a passion that made her knees weak. They stayed on the porch until late into the night, talking about their plans, their hopes for the future. Ethan wanted to expand the ranch, maybe buy some more land. Natalie wanted to start a proper garden, maybe sell vegetables and eggs in town. They talked about children, about how many they wanted and what they would name them. "I want a houseful," Ethan said. "I always wished I had brothers and sisters growing up. It was lonely being an only child." "I want that too," Natalie agreed. "A big, noisy family, a house full of love and laughter." They decided to get married as soon as possible. There was no point in waiting, not when they both knew what they wanted. The next morning, they rode into Leavenworth together to see the preacher and arrange the ceremony. They ran into Marcus Daniels on Main Street, and Natalie took great pleasure in telling him they were engaged. Marcus looked like he had swallowed something sour. "Well, congratulations, I suppose. I hope you know what you are getting into, Mitchell. She is a stubborn one." "That is one of the many things I love about her," Ethan replied, putting his arm around Natalie's shoulders. "By the way, here is what she owes you." He handed Marcus an envelope containing $300 plus interest. Marcus counted it quickly, and then his eyes widened. "This is the full amount. The contract said you had a year to pay." "We do not need a year," Ethan said. "We are settling this debt now today, so Natalie never has to think about it again." Natalie stared at Ethan in shock. "But that was your money, the money you won in the poker game." "It was prize money," Ethan said, "and I cannot think of a better use for it than freeing you from this debt." "You are worth 1,000 times more than $300, Natalie. You are worth everything." She could not help it. She burst into tears right there on Main Street, throwing her arms around Ethan and sobbing into his chest. He held her tightly, stroking her hair and murmuring soothing words. When she finally pulled herself together, Marcus was gone, and several townspeople were watching them with curious expressions. "Let them stare," Ethan said. "Let the whole town know that I am the luckiest man alive." They were married 3 days later in the small church on the edge of town. Natalie wore a simple blue dress that she had made herself, and Ethan wore his best suit, which he admitted he had only worn twice before. The preacher's wife and the lawyer Jeremiah Stone stood as witnesses, and the ceremony was short and sweet. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ethan kissed her so thoroughly that the preacher's wife blushed and looked away. They rode back to the ranch together, husband and wife, and Natalie felt like she was floating on air. Everything had happened so fast, and yet it felt completely right, like this was always how things were supposed to turn out. That night, after they made love for the first time in the big bed in Ethan's room, which was now their room, Ethan held her close and said, "You know, I told you I would give you my ranch, but I never actually did it. I want to make it official." "What are you talking about, the ranch?" "I want it to be in both our names. I want you to be an equal partner in everything. This is not just my dream anymore, Natalie. It is our dream." "Ethan, you do not have to do that." "I know I do not have to. I want to. Tomorrow we will go see the lawyer and have the deed changed. From now on, this ranch belongs to both of us." Natalie felt tears pricking her eyes again. She seemed to cry a lot these days, but they were happy tears, tears of joy and gratitude and overwhelming love. "I do not deserve you. You deserve the world," Ethan said, kissing her forehead. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you." They went to the lawyer's office the next day and had the deed officially changed to include Natalie's name. Jeremiah Stone drew up the papers with a smile, clearly pleased to see them so happy. As they left his office, Natalie looked at the document in her hands, seeing her name written there next to Ethan's, and she felt a sense of ownership and belonging that she had never experienced before. This was her ranch, her home, her life. The months that followed were the happiest of Natalie's life. She and Ethan worked side by side every day, building their ranch and their life together. They bought more cattle with the money Ethan had saved, and they began breeding horses in earnest. Star grew strong and healthy, and they trained him to saddle, planning to keep him as Natalie's personal mount. Winter came, and with it the challenges of keeping the animals fed and healthy through the cold months. But they worked together, Ethan teaching Natalie everything he knew about ranching, and Natalie contributing her own knowledge and ideas. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other through the difficult times. In February, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan over dinner one evening, and he jumped up from the table so fast he knocked over his chair. He picked her up and spun her around, just like he had the night he proposed, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "I know," Natalie said, laughing. "I was there when it happened." They spent the next few months preparing for the baby's arrival. Ethan built a cradle from scratch, sanding it smooth and carving little stars into the headboard. Natalie sewed tiny clothes and blankets, using fabric she bought in town with money from selling eggs and vegetables. They turned the small storage room off the main bedroom into a nursery, painting it yellow because they did not know if they would have a boy or a girl. The baby came in late September, almost exactly a year after Natalie had arrived at the ranch. The labor was long and difficult, but the midwife from town stayed with them through it all, and Ethan never left Natalie's side. He held her hand and wiped her forehead and told her how strong she was, how brave, how much he loved her. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Ethan wept openly. He held the baby with infinite tenderness, staring down at his son with an expression of pure wonder. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Natalie, he is perfect." They named him Samuel Ethan Mitchell after Natalie's father. Little Samuel had his mother's dark hair and his father's green eyes, and from the beginning he was a good baby, content to sleep in his cradle while his parents worked, and happy to be passed between them during meals. Life settled into a new rhythm after Samuel's birth. Natalie discovered that she loved being a mother, loved watching her son grow and change every day. Ethan was a devoted father, always willing to walk the floor with Samuel during the night or change a diaper without complaint. They took turns doing chores so that one of them could always be with the baby, and they made decisions together about the ranch and their growing family. When Samuel was 6 months old, Ethan surprised Natalie by taking her to town and showing her a small building on Main Street that was for sale. "What do you think?" he asked. "About what?" "About opening your dress shop. You told me once that you had dreamed of it, and I think you should do it. We have enough money saved and the ranch is doing well. You could make dresses and sell them here in town. I know there are plenty of women who would love to have something better than what they can order from the catalog." Natalie stared at the building, then at her husband. "You remembered that." "I remember everything you have ever told me," Ethan said. "So what do you say? Shall we buy it?" They bought the building that day, and over the next few months, Natalie fixed it up. She hired a local carpenter to build shelves and a counter, and she ordered fabric and thread from Kansas City. She made sample dresses to display in the window, and she put up a sign that said Bradford Mitchell Dressmaking. The shop was a success from the beginning. Women came from all over the county to have dresses made, and Natalie found that she had a real talent for it. She could look at a woman and know exactly what style would flatter her, what colors would bring out her eyes. She worked 3 days a week in town, and Ethan watched Samuel on those days, bringing him to the shop for lunch so Natalie could nurse him. 2 years after Samuel was born, their daughter arrived. They named her Margaret Rose, and she had Ethan's green eyes and Natalie's stubborn streak. Samuel adored his little sister, and they were inseparable from the beginning. The house that had once seemed so quiet was now filled with the sound of children's laughter and the patter of little feet. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They hired a couple of ranch hands to help with the work, and they built a new barn and expanded the pastures. Ethan's dream of breeding quality horses came true, and they began selling to the cavalry and to wealthy ranchers across Kansas and beyond. Natalie's dress shop became the most popular in the county, and she hired an assistant to help with the sewing. They had 2 more children over the years, another boy named James and a daughter named Elizabeth. Their house was indeed full of noise and love and laughter, just as they had dreamed. Sunday dinners were chaotic affairs with 4 children clamoring for attention, but Natalie and Ethan would not have had it any other way. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Natalie back to Leavenworth, to the spot outside the Silver Spur where he had first offered her a job. The saloon was still there, though Marcus Daniels had sold it years ago and moved back east. The town had grown considerably, with new buildings and more people, but this spot was the same. "You remember what I said to you here?" Ethan asked, holding both her hands in his. "You said a lot of things. I said I would pay you fair wages and treat you with respect. I said you would be free to leave whenever you wanted. I kept those promises, did I not?" "You did," Natalie agreed, "though I never wanted to leave. But I never told you the most important thing. I never told you that the moment I saw you standing by that poker table, looking so fierce and scared and brave all at once, I knew you were going to change my life. I did not know how yet, but I knew, and I was right. You changed everything, Natalie. You made my house a home. You gave me a family. You made me happier than I ever thought possible." Natalie reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "You saved me, Ethan. You gave me back my life, my dignity, my dreams. You gave me love and respect and a partnership. You gave me everything." "We saved each other," Ethan said, and he kissed her there on Main Street, not caring who saw. That evening they had dinner at the hotel, just the 2 of them. It was a rare treat to be without the children, though they missed them terribly and could not stop talking about them. Over dessert, Ethan pulled out a small box and slid it across the table. "What is this?" Natalie asked. "Open it." Inside was a beautiful necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant in the shape of a star. "For delivering Star that night," Ethan said. "For being there when I needed you most. For being my partner in everything." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. "It is beautiful. Not as beautiful as you." She stood up and walked around the table, kissing him soundly. The other diners smiled indulgently. It was clear to everyone who saw them that this was a couple deeply in love. The years continued to pass, and they were good years. Samuel grew into a fine young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He took on more responsibility as he got older, learning to manage the cattle and train the horses. Margaret Rose showed an interest in her mother's dress shop, and she had a real eye for fashion and design. James was the quieter one, happiest with a book in his hand, and they encouraged his love of learning. Elizabeth, the youngest, was fearless and adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring the prairie. When Samuel turned 20, Ethan officially made him a partner in the ranch. It was important to Ethan that his son understood the value of ownership and responsibility. They had a small celebration, and Ethan gave Samuel the same speech he had once given Natalie about doing things the right way, about treating people fairly and with respect. "Your mother and I built this ranch on those principles," Ethan said, "and I expect you to continue in that tradition. The Mitchell name means something in this county. It means honesty and hard work and integrity. Do not ever compromise that." "I will not, Father," Samuel promised. "I will make you proud. You already have, son. You already have." Margaret Rose took over the dress shop when she turned 18, and Natalie stepped back to spend more time at the ranch. She had loved running the shop, but she loved being home more, loved working in her garden and helping Ethan with the horses. They were in their 40s now, and while they were still strong and healthy, they had earned the right to slow down a little. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times over the years, Ethan said, "Do you ever think about that poker game, about how different your life would be if I had not won?" "Sometimes," Natalie admitted, "but not in a bad way. I think about how lucky I was that it was you sitting at that table, how easily it could have been someone else, someone who would have treated me like property instead of a person." "I never really won you, you know," Ethan said. "You were never mine to win. You always belonged to yourself." "I gave myself to you," Natalie corrected. "And you gave yourself to me. That is what love is, I think. Not taking, but giving. Not owning, but sharing. When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best." Ethan put his arm around her and she leaned her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from blue to pink to purple. This was their favorite time of day, when the work was done and the children were settled and it was just the two of them. "You have any regrets?" Natalie asked. "Not a single one. You, not one." "Well, maybe I wish I had not been so scared to trust you at first. I wish I had known sooner how good you were going to be to me." "You had every right to be scared," Ethan said. "I am just grateful you took the chance anyway." As the stars began to appear, Natalie thought about everything that had happened since that day in the Silver Spur. She had been offered as a prize in a poker game, a humiliating experience that should have broken her. Instead, it had led her to the love of her life, to a partnership that was stronger than anything she could have imagined. Ethan had not just won her that day. He had chosen to see her as a person, to respect her autonomy, to give her the means to control her own destiny. And in doing so, he had won something far more valuable than any poker game could offer: her heart, freely given. They had built a life together, a family, a legacy. The ranch was thriving, their children were healthy and happy, and they had each other. What more could anyone ask for? The years continued to be kind to them. James went off to university in the East, the first Mitchell to pursue higher education. He wrote long letters home describing his studies and the city life, but he always said he missed the ranch and planned to come back eventually. Elizabeth, true to her adventurous nature, married a surveyor and moved to Colorado, though she visited often with her husband and eventually her own children. Samuel married a local girl named Catherine, and they built a house on the north edge of the property. They had 3 children of their own, and Ethan and Natalie became grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. There was nothing quite like watching Samuel with his own son, seeing the gentle patience that Ethan had instilled in him passed down to another generation. Margaret Rose met a traveling salesman who came through town selling fabric, and they fell in love quickly and passionately. Natalie recognized that feeling, that certainty that you had found your person. She gave them her blessing, and Margaret Rose moved to Kansas City with her husband, where they opened a large dress shop together. She came home several times a year, always bringing the latest fashion magazines and stories about city life. As Ethan and Natalie entered their 50s, they began to truly slow down. Samuel took over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, and they focused on the things they loved most. Ethan spent hours training horses, still finding joy in teaching a young colt to trust and respond. Natalie tended her garden, which had become legendary in the county for its bounty and beauty. They took long rides across their land, sometimes packing a lunch and staying out all day. They would find a shady spot by the creek and sit together, talking about their life, their children, their memories. These were precious times, unhurried and peaceful, filled with the kind of contentment that only comes from a life well lived. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children surprised them with a party. The whole town was invited, and it seemed like everyone came. The tables were laden with food, and there was music and dancing late into the night. Samuel made a toast, his voice thick with emotion. "My parents taught me that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every single day," he said. They chose each other 25 years ago, and they have been choosing each other every day since. They built this ranch together, raised us together, and created a legacy of love and respect that I hope to continue with my own family. Here is to 25 more years. Everyone raised their glasses, and Ethan and Natalie stood together, surrounded by their children, their grandchildren, their friends, and their community. Natalie looked around at all these faces, all these people who had become part of their story, and she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Later, when the party was winding down and the stars were bright overhead, Ethan pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Mitchell?" "You may, Mr. Mitchell." They danced slowly, barely moving, just swaying together in the warm night air. The musicians played a sweet, slow melody, and other couples joined them, but Ethan and Natalie only had eyes for each other. "I love you more today than I did 25 years ago," Ethan whispered in her ear. "I did not think that was possible, but it is true." "I love you more too," Natalie replied. "You are my best friend, my partner, my everything. I would do it all again, you know. I would sit at that poker table 1,000 times if it meant finding you. And I would take the chance on you 1,000 times. You were the best gamble I ever made." They danced until the musicians packed up their instruments, and then they walked hand in hand back to their house, the house they had shared for so many years. Inside, everything was familiar and comfortable, filled with the memories of their life together. Pictures of their children lined the walls, along with drawings the grandchildren had made. The furniture was worn and well-loved, the kind of wear that comes from a house that is truly lived in. In their bedroom, Ethan helped Natalie out of her dress, his hands as gentle and reverent as they had been on their wedding night. They made love slowly, taking their time, savoring each touch and kiss. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Natalie's head on Ethan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, his fingers trailing through her hair. "About how lucky I am. About how that terrible day in the Silver Spur led to all of this. About how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best things." "You made the best things," Ethan said. "You took a bad situation and turned it into something beautiful. That was all you, Natalie." "No, it was us. It was always us." They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, content and complete. The years rolled on as years do. They celebrated more anniversaries, more birthdays, more holidays. James came back from university and opened a law practice in Leavenworth. using his education to help people who could not afford representation. He made his parents proud by standing up for the underdog, just as Ethan had once stood up for Natalie. Elizabeth and her surveyor husband had 5 children, and their house in Colorado was always full of chaos and laughter. She wrote long letters to Natalie, asking for advice on motherhood and sharing stories about her children's antics. Reading those letters always made Natalie smile, seeing so much of herself in her adventurous daughter. Samuel and Catherine expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land when it became available. They bred horses that won prizes at shows across the state, and the Mitchell name became synonymous with quality. Samuel credited everything he knew to his father, but Ethan always said that Samuel had taken what he learned and made it better. Margaret Rose's dress shop in Kansas City became famous, written up in newspapers and magazines. She designed dresses for governors' wives and society ladies, but she never forgot where she came from. She sent money to her parents regularly, though they always tried to send it back, and she funded a scholarship for young women in Leavenworth who wanted to learn a trade. When Ethan turned 60, he finally admitted that the ranch work was getting harder. His knees ached in the mornings, and he could not ride as long or as hard as he once had. But he was not sad about it. He had lived a full life, done meaningful work, and now he could step back and let his son carry on the legacy. He and Natalie spent more and more time on the porch, watching the world go by. They read books together, sharing passages they found particularly moving. They played cards in the evenings, though never poker. That game held too many complicated memories. They told stories to their grandchildren, tales of the old days when the West was still wild and anything seemed possible. One warm spring evening, when Natalie was 62 and Ethan was 65, they sat on the porch watching the sunset as usual. The sky was particularly beautiful that night, streaked with pink and gold. Daisy had passed away years ago, but Star was still alive, grazing peacefully in the pasture. He was old now, his muzzle gray, but he was content. "You remember the night Star was born?" Natalie asked. "I remember every moment I have spent with you," Ethan replied. "But yes, I remember that night especially. That was when I knew for certain that I loved you. You never told me that. I just did." Natalie smiled and squeezed his hand. "I love you, Ethan Mitchell. Thank you for giving me this life. Thank you for sharing it with me." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. The stars began to appear, bright pinpricks in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound was answered by another. The prairie was alive with the sounds of evening, crickets and frogs, and the rustling of grass in the breeze. "I could not have asked for a better life," Ethan said quietly. "I have been so blessed. A beautiful wife who I love more with each passing day, children who make me proud, grandchildren to spoil, meaningful work, and a home I built with my own hands. What more could a man want?" "Nothing," Natalie agreed. "We have everything that matters." They stayed on the porch until the stars were fully out, until the moon rose silver and bright. Then they went inside, checked the locks on the doors, and went to bed. They had done this same routine thousands of times over the years, and it never got old. The simple comfort of home, the security of having someone beside you who loved you unconditionally. The peace that came from a life well lived. Years continued to pass, and Ethan and Natalie grew older together. They moved a little slower, their hair turned silver, their faces lined with wrinkles earned from decades of laughter and work under the Kansas sun. But they never stopped loving each other, never stopped choosing each other every single day. When Natalie was 69, she got sick with pneumonia. The doctor came from town and did what he could, but her lungs were weak from years of breathing in the dust of the prairie. For 2 weeks, she was bedridden, and Ethan barely left her side. He rade to her, brought her tea and soup, held her hand through the worst of it. One night, when her fever was particularly high and she was drifting in and out of consciousness, she opened her eyes and found Ethan sitting beside the bed, his head bowed in prayer. "Ethan," she whispered. He jerked upright, immediately taking her hand. "I am here. I am right here. I need you to know something. Do not talk. Save your strength. Listen to me," she insisted, squeezing his hand with what little strength she had. "If I do not make it through this, I need you to know that I have had the most wonderful life. I have been so happy. You gave me that. You gave me everything. You are going to be fine," Ethan said fiercely, tears streaming down his face. "You are going to get better, and we are going to have many more years together. I hope so. But if not, if this is it, I want you to know that I would not change a single thing. Even the hard parts, even the struggles, they were all worth it because I got to go through them with you." Ethan pressed his forehead to their joined hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "I cannot lose you. I do not know how to be in this world without you. You are stronger than you think. And you have our children, our grandchildren. They need you. Promise me you will keep living, keep loving them, keep being the wonderful man you are. I promise. But you are going to be fine. You have to be fine." Whether it was sheer stubbornness or divine intervention, Natalie did get better. Slowly, over the course of several weeks, her strength returned. The fever broke, her lungs cleared, and she was able to get out of bed. The whole family came to visit, and there was much rejoicing. But the illness had aged her, and both she and Ethan knew that their time was growing short. They did not waste it. They spent every day together, cherishing each moment. They went through old photographs, telling stories about the people and places captured in those faded images. They wrote letters to their children and grandchildren, wanting to leave behind their wisdom and their love. They made sure all their affairs were in order, all the legal documents signed and filed. And they loved each other with the intensity of people who know that every day is a gift. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw another huge party. All 4 children came home, along with their spouses and all the grandchildren. There were 15 grandchildren now, ranging in age from infants to young adults. The house was bursting at the seams, chaotic and loud and wonderful. Ethan and Natalie sat in the place of honor at the head of the table, looking out at the family they had created. Samuel and Catherine were there with their children, all of whom worked on the ranch now. Margaret Rose had come from Kansas City with her husband and their 2 daughters. James arrived with his wife and their 4 children, and Elizabeth came all the way from Colorado with her brood of 5. After dinner, Samuel stood up to make a toast. 50 years ago today, my parents stood in a church in Leavenworth and made vows to each other. They have kept those vows every single day since. They have loved each other through good times and bad, through sickness and health, through poverty and prosperity. They have built an empire together, raised 4 children who adore them, and created a legacy that will last for generations. They have shown us all what true love looks like. So I ask you to raise your glasses to Ethan and Natalie Mitchell, the best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for. May they have many more years together, and may we all be fortunate enough to find even a fraction of the love they share. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Ethan and Natalie stood together, and Ethan pulled her into his arms for a kiss. Their grandchildren giggled and made exaggerated sounds of disgust, which only made Ethan kiss Natalie longer, much to everyone's amusement. All right, Natalie said, laughing and pushing him away. "We are old, remember. You are going to give me a heart attack." "What a way to go," Ethan said with a wink. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan and Natalie took one last walk around their property. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light. They walked hand in hand, not talking much, just being together. They stopped by the pasture where Star had once run, now home to his descendants. They visited the garden, where neat rows of vegetables were just beginning to sprout in the spring soil. They stood by the barn where they had delivered that first foal together so many years ago. "We did good, did we not?" Natalie said, leaning against Ethan's chest. "We did better than good. We did extraordinary. I love you so much. Sometimes I think my heart cannot possibly hold any more love for you, and then I wake up the next day and I love you even more." "I know exactly what you mean," Ethan said, tightening his arms around her. "You are my heart, Natalie. You always have been, and you always will be." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms under the stars they had watched together for 50 years. Finally, they walked back to the house and climbed into bed, falling asleep in their usual positions, Natalie's head on Ethan's chest, his arm around her shoulders. The next few years were gentle and peaceful. Ethan and Natalie were in their 70s now, content to let others do the heavy work while they advised and told stories. They were the patriarch and matriarch of a large, thriving family, and they took their roles seriously. They gave advice when asked, helped with the grandchildren, and generally made themselves useful without getting in the way. Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76. He and Natalie had spent the evening on the porch, as was their custom, talking and watching the sunset. They had gone to bed at their usual time, and in the morning when Natalie woke, she found that Ethan had passed during the night. He looked peaceful, a small smile on his face, and Natalie knew that he had not suffered. The grief was overwhelming. For 53 years, Ethan had been her constant companion, her partner in everything. The house felt impossibly empty without him. The bed was too big, the meals too quiet, the evenings too long. But Natalie was not alone. Her children rallied around her, taking turns staying at the house, making sure she was never by herself unless she wanted to be. Samuel, in particular, was a comfort. He looked so much like his father, had so many of Ethan's mannerisms and expressions. Talking to Samuel helped Natalie feel connected to Ethan, helped ease the terrible ache in her heart. 3 months after Ethan died, Natalie was sitting on the porch in her usual spot when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up to see a rider approaching, and as he got closer, she realized it was her oldest grandson, Samuel's firstborn, also named Ethan after his grandfather. Young Ethan dismounted and came to sit beside her. He was 23 now, a fine young man who had his grandfather's green eyes and his great capacity for kindness. "Hello, grandmother. Hello, sweetheart. What brings you by? I wanted to check on you, and I wanted to ask you something." "Ask away. Tell me about grandfather. Tell me the story of how you met." Natalie smiled, even as tears pricked her eyes. "Which version do you want, the short version or the long one?" "The long one. I want to hear everything." So Natalie told him. She told him about the poker game, about standing in the silver spur feeling humiliated and scared. She told him about Ethan winning, and then offering her a job instead of claiming her as property. She told him about coming to this ranch and learning to trust again, about delivering Star and falling in love. She told him about the proposal, the wedding, the years of building their life together. Young Ethan listened intently, asking questions, wanting to know every detail. When Natalie finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Grandfather was a good man," he finally said, "the best man I ever knew. I want to be like him. I want to find a love like you two had." "You will," Natalie assured him. "You have his heart, his kindness, his integrity." Some lucky woman is going to be very fortunate to win your love. I hope so. I hope I can make him proud. You already do. You both do. All my children and grandchildren make us proud every single day." Young Ethan hugged her tightly, and Natalie held on to him, grateful for his solid presence, for the continuation of the family she and Ethan had built together. Natalie lived for 3 more years after Ethan passed. They were bittersweet years, filled with the joy of watching her family grow and the sadness of missing her husband. She filled her days with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on her knowledge and her stories. She wanted them to know where they came from, to understand the values that had built this family. On a warm September evening, exactly 56 years after she had first arrived at the ranch, Natalie sat on the porch watching the sunset. All 4 of her children were there, along with many of the grandchildren. They had come for a regular Sunday dinner, and no one wanted to leave, content to sit together in the fading light. Natalie looked around at all these beloved faces and felt a deep sense of peace. She had lived a long, full life. She had loved and been loved in return. She had built something meaningful that would outlast her by generations. What more could anyone ask for? As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink, Natalie closed her eyes and let out a long, contented sigh. "Mother," Margaret Rose said, noticing the change in her breathing. "Mother, are you all right?" But Natalie was already slipping away, her spirit leaving her body to join Ethan wherever he had gone. Her last thought was not one of fear or regret, but of gratitude. She had been offered as a prize in a poker game, but she had ended up winning everything that mattered. The family mourned her passing, but they also celebrated her life. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people from all over the state, people whose lives Natalie had touched in big ways and small. They buried her next to Ethan on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land they had built together. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations. Samuel's children ran it after him, and their children after that. The Mitchell name remained synonymous with integrity and quality, just as Ethan had always wanted. Margaret Rose's dress shop became a chain of stores across the Midwest, providing employment for hundreds of women. James's legal practice grew into a respected firm that continued his work of helping those who could not afford representation. Elizabeth's children spread across the West, carrying the family values with them wherever they went. And on warm September evenings, when the sun set over the Kansas prairie, family members would gather on the old porch and tell the story of how it all began. They would talk about Ethan and Natalie, about the poker game and the ranch and the life they had built together. They would talk about love and respect and partnership, about how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best things. The story became legend, passed down from generation to generation, a reminder that true love is not about owning someone, but about choosing them every single day. About seeing them as an equal partner and building something beautiful together. About giving rather than taking, about respect rather than possession. Ethan and Natalie Mitchell had lived and loved fully, leaving behind a legacy that would last forever. And somewhere beyond the stars they had watched together for so many years, they were together still, their love eternal and unbreakable, exactly as it had always been.